Okay, so away we go. This is the second session in our Sacred Seasons um, program that will be meeting once a month. And Julie, I'm just going to mute you, but please feel free to unmute if you have something to say. Um, Last month, we talked about the concept of time and the human impulse to understand change and what change means, give meaning to the changes in our lives, whether those changes are the cyclical changes of the seasons or the lifetime changes that happen over the course of our entire lives with our birth, growth, development and maturity, and then our decline and death. That in some ways is cyclical because then other people are going through the same thing. We talked about a lot of that. And what we are going to now do for the rest of the sessions is we're going to look at different rituals in a variety of religious holidays across faith traditions, but we're going to do it by theme or by some kind of category rather than doing it religion by religion. A lot of these multicultural, religious, across religious studies types of things tend to focus, one month we'll talk about Judaism and what is Judaism, and then the next month we'll talk about Hinduism and what is Hinduism. And that can be helpful and meaningful in some ways. But I thought it would be more interesting for us to try it this way. And so instead of talking about one religion each time, we're going to talk about all the religions and pick a topic that is kind of shared across the different religions, and then talk about at least some examples. I can't do all of them because if I tried to, then we would be here all night. So tonight we are going to talk about fall harvest festivals. So for those who have been with me before in my classes, you know that I like to start by defining things. So I have a few ideas about some of these words. So what is fall? Well, we talk about fall. Some places will use the word autumn instead. The word fall, referring to the season that comes after summer, is Germanic, and it relates to the same word in a variety of languages. Even if the word isn't quite the same word, it relates to the word that means something like to fall from a height. And so we have fall as in I took a fall, I took a tumble, or fall as in autumn. We have the same word. Some languages don't have the exact same word, but they derive from that same word.
Hmm.
And so there is something related there then to the falling perhaps of leaves or something like that. There in Middle English, there was typically often used in writing phrases like the fall of the leaf or the fall of the year compared to spring. Um, Being the spring of the leaf, the springing forth of the leaf, or the spring of the year, the springing forth of the new year. So there was, in some senses, the winter is not really part of the year. It's the waiting period, the silent period, but the period between years, which will be interesting for us to explore a little bit more when we get to winter holidays to talk about
Mhm.
those types of holidays. But this is the part of the year where things are falling away, where the year is coming to an end. And that, for a variety of reasons, we have the fall equinox when we change from the height of summer when things are warmer and the days are longer into the longer nights, the colder weather is coming in, agriculture slows down in certain ways, um, things like that. Now, it's important for us to note that fall or autumn is not a universal experience for all people all around the world. In the tropics, we don't get the change of seasons like you do in places that are further north or further south. And of course, we also have the issue of living in the northern hemisphere. And so this is the time of year for us when we experience fall or autumn, the fall of the year. But of course, the people in the southern hemisphere are actually experiencing now the spring of the year, the beginning of their agricultural year. And so, keeping that in mind as we consider, the universal ramifications of some of this, I think will be important. And then, of course, we also have, at least in our culture, we have some social elements that come along with the fall. Because we lived in a fairly agrarian society as people in the United States, we decided that at the time that the harvest finishes up is when children are no longer needed so much at home and they will be able to go to school. And so we take off the summers, even still today, even though our kids are not working out in the fields all summer long, because of that tradition. And so we've got that kind of you've got time during the winter to go in and learn how to read and write, but the rest of the year you are busy. And so the fall denotes to us school time. We've got some expectations about dress, like you hit Labor Day and you're not supposed to wear white anymore. Different things like that have an effect on our understanding of what this season is about. And it's interesting to think about why those types of traditions or types of expectations are what they are. Why can't we wear white after Labor Day? Why is that a problem? I don't know. But my grandmother certainly thought it was a huge problem. So then one other question to think about is, what is harvest? So harvest actually, before the 16th century, in English and other Germanic languages that are similar to English, the word harvest actually was the word that they used in their language to refer to the season of autumn. So harvest was not the word like we use it today, to refer to the time of year when we are harvesting the land, but it was actually the name of the season itself. So they didn't have the word autumn; they had the harvest season is what they called it. And so over the course of time, as people moved from being more agrarian to living in towns, they kind of started to lose that sense of harvest being the season, and it slowly changed its meaning and only referred to the activity of harvesting or reaping the vegetables or whatever it was that the grains that you were harvesting that year. And then we had the word autumn or fall became the name that was more commonly used to refer to the season itself. I did find one really interesting thing. In Northern Ireland, there was a different name entirely for this season, and it was called back end. This is the back end season. So that, again, that's interesting in terms of thinking about this part of the year as the falling of the year, the ending of the year, that kind of thing, the back end of the year. And then even there, though, they now use the word autumn rather than their traditional word back end, but that was one that was common for a while. So any other thoughts on fall or autumn and harvest, these concepts, before we hop into thinking about some of the themes related to this time of year?
No.
Good. All right.
Nothing. So.
All right. So before we start talking about some specific holidays related to fall and harvest, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what does autumn feel like? What are some of the themes that you see that are common to you, even in the variety of recognitions that happen even in your life? And of course, you only live in the one culture. Maybe you've lived in different cultures over time. But what are some autumnal themes that you've noticed come up again and again and again when it comes to this time of year?
I guess imminent dying is what comes to mind.
Okay.
To me,
Yeah.
looking at these fall pictures and the leaves as they're turning, and having lost both my parents in the last couple of years is like, and they both died in the fall, and
Mm,
it was like the changing, not only the loss, but simply the changing of our nature in the dying process to, from physical beings to spiritual beings. And watching it in nature is a reminder of that to me.
yeah, that's really interesting. Um, in especially in countries that are that experience a fairly sharp um, distinction between summer and fall and then into winter, where they're a little bit higher up in the latitude line.
Latitude.
That they have very harsh winters, but they also have very nice summers. Like you know in Britain and certain places, Germany, those types of places, there is a lot of
Mhm.
poetry related to what you're saying. The word I think of is melancholy.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, that's a good word for it.
that the possibilities, the hopefulness of the summer months is kind of gone. We're looking at the cold and dark of winter. That's what we're facing next. Our daylight is shortening up, um, and so we kind of become more internal. We become um, inside people in a variety of ways, not just in our physical location because we don't want to be outside in the freezing cold, but we also become a little bit more retrospective, perhaps, because there's
Yes.
not anything to keep us busy, right? Our brains are trying to are looking for something to do when we don't have our hands aren't as busy because we don't have all of the outside things that we need to be working on. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any
It's
other
my
thoughts?
it's my favorite time of year.
Yeah.
Me
So
too.
so what are your feelings about autumn?
Well, the reason I live in Reading is because I've lived in tropical countries and Florida and stuff where we didn't have seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to live someplace where I would have an opportunity to wear sweaters and walk in the leaves and because I had lived in those areas before. But to me, it's kind of a fulfilling season. It's like, well, the harvest represents, bringing in everything and gathering and food and people. And I just love it.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite time.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we just talked about, the melancholy and the loss of
Yeah.
summer and the coming of winter, but there's also something to be said for that, that feeling of fulfillment. Certainly, there's a lot of gratitude during this time of
Yes.
year because we're hopefully able to, have a plentiful harvest, and so we have plenty to eat. Those types of things. The picture of the woman here is actually a depiction of autumn, the goddess, or the kind of female representation of the seasons, in originally in Roman mythology. There was actually a goddess, Autumn, who represented this season, and then this one is from the 19th century, something like that. Just a depiction of what autumn might look like as a woman, and this is fairly typical. She's well fed, she's well groomed, she's adorned with ripened produce of various types. She's attractive. She's not gaunt or shriveled or anything. And so, there is a sense in autumn of gladness and celebration and feeling of fulfillment. Feasting is common, things like that. So it's interesting how is kind of the juxtaposition of two almost opposite ideas that are kind of linked together here in our fall harvest.
Well, I mean, here it's a little interesting because of the fact it is a second half of a wet season. So we get water in the spring, but we also get water in the fall.
Mm.
And the best part of water in the fall is it never tries to kill you. It's not true in the spring. And so it is it and the heat breaks. I mean, because
Yes.
we've spent, 100
Yeah.
some days just cooking. And so, now the temperatures are falling down into the 80s and the days are getting short, which I don't think is as rough on us because we don't shorten our days quite as brutally as they do up in Reading and Washington. But no, I mean, this is the best time of the year around here, hands down. And, my favorite month of the year.
Yeah, the only time of year that I miss Pennsylvania is right now. It's too hot still here for I can watch the colors change and all that, and everything else is fine, and they even have pumpkin patches and all the things that I used to enjoy doing in Pennsylvania, but it's too hot to go. I don't want to go on a hayride when it's 80 degrees.
You can wait till Monday, Katie. It'll be rainy and cold.
Yes, and then I can sit on the wet hay and shiver, right? And
Hey, 80 degrees, that's quite temperate actually.
compared to what you've got going on.
I always found living in Reading, I couldn't carve the pumpkin until Halloween Day. Otherwise
Yes.
it's rotted
Yes.
and I'll see pumpkins carved around here, 2 weeks before Halloween. I'm like, what are they doing? Oh, yeah, we can carve pumpkins on the other side of that.
Yes, they might freeze actually, and then they'll be fine.
But I definitely agree with the harvest aspect here. Yakima is in the fruit bowl of the nation, and we've just got thousands of acres of apples around us. In fact, just across the street, they started harvesting the apples 2 days ago, and busy, busy, busy. And today, those 130,000 trees are empty. And
Wow.
it's just an awesome process to watch. But yeah, I mean, in our own yards, harvesting, and we've been busy all summer working in the yards, and it's kind of a nice feeling to shut it down and to get everything out and clean it up and put stuff in storage, get the canning finished up, and yeah.
Yeah, this is Jen. Sorry, I cannot get my video to work, but I'm here. I'm late, but I'm here. This is my favorite time of year for a lot of the same reasons mentioned, the cooling down. I feel like I'm I'm more excited about getting out in the yard, cleaning things up. I love the color, especially in Reading. The fall colors are amazing. Just down by the river, all the trees down there. It's just it's a beautiful sight. And I like to be outside as much as possible. And so this weather is the perfect weather for me to be out for a walk or a run or a bike ride or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Well, it doesn't really feel like fall because everything's still green here.
yeah.
All
Well,
trees, everything.
it's turning down. It is turning down here. I got a big pile of leaves out in my backyard, but yeah, we truly had a real spring this year, a pretty mild summer, and a real fall this year because it's not always that distinct.
Yes, that is very true. Yeah, I was actually just in Bernie today, and it's beautiful up there.
I'll bet.
We're a little bit behind. I mean, there are some
Oh, sorry.
places where you can see, it's really coming, but there are other places where things are still green. But any other thoughts about themes before next we'll hop into some of the different actual religious traditions and holidays.
Well, of course, there's Halloween.
Yes, we're going to talk about that actually.
Halloween.
That's one of the ones I chose. All right, so obviously I couldn't talk about every single fall festival, harvest festival that exists, so I just picked out some important ones and some that just because I liked them. So we'll go through these, and then if there's any that, any of the rest of you are, hey, why didn't we talk about this one, or this is what I know about this one, then we can bring those in, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. Oh, and I also wanted to mention this is our first session that is like this, where we're going to talk about individual holidays. So I was kind of debating with myself. I don't like slideshows where I'm just reading text at you. Sometimes I'll have slides that are summaries of what I'm saying. Other times we'll just talk about something. So this time I just did one slide for each thing and just gave some visuals for everyone. But if you're more of a visual person that needs to see some of the words and things, I can do more with the slides next time. Just let me know. And I can add a few slides that have, for example, some of the Bible passages that we'll look at, things like that. But so for today, we will take a look here at our Sukkot as our first holiday that we'll be investigating. So Sukkot is a Jewish holiday. It appears in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, which Christians also take as their scripture. And I'm going to talk a little bit in just a second about where exactly that comes from and some of the Bible passages related to it. But in Judaism, Sukkot is celebrated for 7 days. It begins on the 15th day in the month of Tishrei. And so it's a very specific date that it is supposed to be celebrated, but recalling that the Jewish calendar and the Gregorian calendar do not match up. They don't always fall, on a particular date that we would recognize. It's usually a range of certain parts of the year, but it's in the fall each year. The idea with Sukkot is that there is a sense of welcoming, of extending hospitality. That's an important aspect of Sukkot. And so there are rituals related to inviting guests. You can see here that there's a fairly sizable table laid out for guests to come and dine together. And then there is also a tradition of symbolic guests. So character names that we would recognize from the Bible who are symbolically welcomed to the table and to the festivities that are being celebrated. And they're invited to participate by visiting the sukkah, which is the booth. This is what the booth looks like, at least in modern times. So we'll talk a little bit more about the sukkah in just a second, but I wanted to talk first about the Bible and kind of where does this festival come from. So the earlier mention of this festival is in the book of Exodus, and it refers to the festival of ingathering. It says in Exodus chapter 34, verse 22 says, "You shall observe the festival of weeks, the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the festival of ingathering at the turn of the year." So interesting phrase, turn of the year. Again, where we have that sense of turning from what to what. And so this is an early indication of this Feast of Booths, the Sukkot, and it is primarily about agriculture. It marks the end of the harvest time and thus the end of the agricultural year in the land of Israel. And so originally it seems that Sukkot was an agricultural festival. But then later we see the development of this holiday, not just from the perspective of agriculture, but actually more into a religious significance, into a historical significance. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verses 42 to 43, it says, "Now the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the produce of the land," so see, it actually dictates exactly the day, that 15th day of the 7th month, "when you have gathered the produce of the land, you shall keep the festival of the Lord, lasting 7 days, a complete rest on the first day, and a complete rest on the 8th day. On the first day, you shall take the fruit of the majestic trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. You shall keep it as a festival to the Lord, lasting 7 days in the year. You shall keep it in the 7th month as a statute forever throughout your generations. You shall live in booths for 7 days. All who are native born in Israel shall live in booths, so that your generations may know that I made the Israelites live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So, really interesting that it kind of developed in this way, not just from the agricultural sense, but as time went on, people started to give it that historical context. Why are we doing this? Well, because the people of Israel lived in booths, as we believe, in the exile when they after they left Egypt, they were traveling, in the desert, and they didn't have homes. They lived in booths or tents, and related still to the harvest. The idea being that the booth represents what the harvesters would have been living in, sleeping in, because they wanted to stay near to the harvest. And oh, hey, there's Jen. And be able to keep working. They didn't want to have to travel back and forth, fairly long distances sometimes to go back home at the end of the day. So they just stayed there to be able to get the harvested as quickly as possible. And so they had these booths that they lived in. And so the dictation of the festival and the rejoicing and the celebration of what God has given them. So it takes on that religious significance. It isn't just a festival of happiness that we've accomplished our harvest for the year. We're not going to starve all year, but recognizing the source of that plenty is God. And then also remembering that in the importance of our identity as the people of God, coming with that incredibly important story of God bringing the people out of the land of Egypt. If the death and resurrection of Jesus is the kind of critical pinnacle story for Christians, the Exodus is the critical pinnacle story for Jews. And so the connection of this Sukkot to that historical event for them, I think, gives it that additional meaning. Then it kind of expands it out into, it's not just about the harvest. It's not even just about recognizing what God has given us. It's also giving back to God. It's recognizing that God wants us to open our hearts, open our homes, open our bounty to others. And so that's where we get the hospitality and inviting people and that kind of thing that comes into it. So as I said, the pictures that we have here are of sukkah. Sukkot is actually just the plural of sukkah. So Sukkot means booths, or one other word that can be translated into in English is tabernacles, which is of course more related in the way that English is Hebrew is translated into English. That's more where God dwelled during the time that they were in their journeys in the desert. God dwelled in the tabernacle and in the tent of God, or in the booth. So these Sukkot are temporary dwellings, and originally, like I said, the farmers would live in them during the harvest. But then, over the course of time, it became traditional and important for everyone to do this, because it's not just about the practicality of being near to your work. It's also about the religious significance, the historical significance of what it means to live in the booth for this period of time. So remembering that 40 years when the people of God were without homes, they were traveling in the desert after the Exodus. And so the requirements, as far as modern Jews understand them, is that meals must be eaten in the Sukkot during this week of festival, because that's kind of how they decided what does it mean to live in the booth. Well, if you're having your meals there, and then many people also sleep in the booths for the week, if the weather holds up for them. And so those two things together kind of represent living in the booths. And so if you have your meals there, if you sleep there, weather permitting, then that representation of living your life out of the booth for that week. There are a variety of things that happen on each of the days of the 7 days. It goes on for seven full days. Depending on where you are in the world, the things that happen on the days varies. So if you live in Israel, then on the first day of Sukkot, there is a full festival, special worship services, special meals, things like that. But if you live in the diaspora, if you live outside of Israel, then you actually celebrate for the first 2 days as full festivals. The seventh day, the last day, is another big festival where everyone goes to the synagogue and has a special observance for that day. And then the other days, the festival weekdays, are they're not considered to be full festival days. You can still kind of go about some of your regular business, but they're also not they're not right. They're not considered to be kind of regular weekdays. There's special things happening. You are, generally speaking, if you are an adherent Jew who's follows the law, your understanding is that you are allowed to work on activities that are related to the holiday. You can purchase and prepare food. You can clean the house. You can travel to visit friends or prepare for friends to come to visit you, things like that. But activities that are not required as far as the festivities are concerned are often not permitted. So you don't go to work. You don't do a lot of heavy labor intensive tasks. You don't do your laundry. Things that are not necessary are sometimes forbidden, or sometimes at least kind of frowned upon. And so in Israel, most of the time businesses are closed during this week, unless it's maybe the grocery store or something like that could potentially be open for people to be able to do their shopping. Particularly if the proprietor is not Jewish, then they might take advantage of that opportunity, kind of like Christians often like to go to get Chinese food on some of their holidays because the people don't celebrate those things. So there's a special event that happens when it's a Saturday, when it's a Sabbath day during the week of Sukkot. They actually every year on the Sabbath during Sukkot, they read from the book of Ecclesiastes, the section on vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's what they read every time, and it's it refers to some of the things that we've talked about here already. The emphasis on death, the falling of the year, the reminder that everything that we have, everything that we are, will eventually fall away. The only thing that is eternal, and therefore the only thing that is worthy of our eternal ultimate attention, is God's law. And so interesting interesting understanding of, and that those connections make a lot of sense, certainly. So the people, hang out in their Sukkot and have meals together, and visit with friends and family, and visit their Sukkot, their sukkah. That's kind of the main thing that's going on. Like I said, each day has a special thing going on. So if you're interested in learning more, you can read about each of the different days. They all have a different name, and different special things are happening. the Sukkot are made out of different things, as you can see here. They can be made out of wood, they can be made out of metal, they can be made out of palm fronds, whatever you want, whatever you want them to be made out of. But the important thing I think to remember, especially for Christians who are maybe exposed a little bit more to the readings of the New Testament and their opinions about Judaism more so than they are exposed to actual people who practice Judaism, is that even though this is the law and people are supposed to follow this and live and sleep and eat in the Sukkot, there actually is an important part of the law that states that if it is raining, if it is cold, if it isn't healthy for you to spend time in the Sukkot, then basically please don't go inside and be safe, be healthy, have your dinner in a place where you aren't going to be miserable. But if it's nice and that you can celebrate together and have a good time, I don't know any Jews who are actively involved with Sukkot myself. So I've never seen this, but I imagine the kids love this. It's basically like camping out for an entire week with their whole family, out in the backyard or maybe together as a community, depending on where they live, things like that. So some other important symbols with Sukkot is the symbol of protection. Certainly the reminder that God was with the people during that exodus from Egypt, taking care of them, feeding them, guiding them toward where it was that they were, promised the land that they would inhabit, that kind of thing. And so that command to reside in the Sukkot is definitely a reminder of what it is that we have. If you are used to being able to go home and go inside every night, and then you have to live in this Sukkot for a week, I think it helps you to think about some of the even some of the things that are going on in our world now that are relevant in terms of homelessness and poverty, things like that. And so I think it teaches us about God's protectiveness of us, and it teaches us that we, should be protecting each other in important ways, in a variety of ways. It also, refers, I think, to the vulnerability of our lives. We talk about the harvest period as a time of celebration, a time of plenty, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes the harvest can fail. Sometimes we don't get everything that we need. When the grain is still in the field, it's vulnerable. It could be affected by frost or floods or heat or any number of things. And so we need God's intervention to make sure that we have what it is that we need. But once we've pulled it all in and put it away in our storehouses, then we can easily lose awareness of the importance of God's involvement in our lives and God's protection. And so to order the people to spend this time outside, to give up their comfort, give up their feelings of protection in their permanent house, and to reside in this self-made little booth or hut that they have to build on their own. I think that it kind of forces you to think about everything that you have and have some gratitude for that. And then I think second important theme that you can kind of see tracing throughout Sukkot is the concept of community, unity, certainly togetherness, to make sure that all segments of society are taken care of and are connected. Whether you are the richest person or the poorest person in Sukkot, everybody's gotta live in the booth, and you've got to make the booth yourself, and you've got to deal with the discomforts of that. And so to kind of level the playing field, develops some of that unity where everyone feels a little bit more bound together, a little bit more equal. And there's an interesting quote in the Talmud, which is a different level of law. It's not the Torah itself, but it's a kind of interpretive level of the law. And it says, the entire nation of Israel may and ought to dwell in a single sukkah. So obviously, you can't fit several million people in one of these little booths. So it's not a literal thing. It's some kind of metaphorical idea. But the idea being that this one single structure represents the deep oneness of the people, the 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 ability to transcend all of the differences that we experience and understand what really matters, what really connects us as people and as God's children. And so I think that's those are some of the themes that I noticed. Any questions or comments? Anything that pops out to you as important here?
So I actually lived for a little bit next to an Orthodox Jewish rabbi.
Oh, cool.
And I helped him construct. He was a single man. He
Uh-huh.
roved around the region because there weren't very many Orthodox Jews, so he satisfied the various religious needs for the handful in the area. And he was building his, and his was like this little tiny shed. I was handing him up pine leaves that he had collected out of the forest and was putting
Uh-huh.
thing. I never really realized fully what it was. I mean, he explained a little bit of it, but it didn't translate to like a familiar structure.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Any other comments?
I've never heard of it before. So, yeah, I'm just learning something new
Yeah, so this one
altogether.
is actually considered, I mean, it's funny with Judaism, it feels like every holiday that you hear about in Judaism, somebody's going to say, and this is the most important holiday in all of Judaism. So this is the most important holiday in all of Judaism, but I'm sure next month I'll have another most important
Yeah.
holiday in all of Judaism. But this is a very important holiday. Like I said, the Exodus is integral to the Jewish identity, and so that part of it is important. And the spending time together is a theme that we'll see a lot of with Jewish holidays.
Mm.
The remembrance of God's protection and love and those types of things are all very important. So it's a cool and interesting one. I would love to be able to hang out with some people who actually do this and maybe get an invite to have dinner in their sukkah sometime. All right, well, let's move on. We've got several more of these to get through, and that was probably my longest one because it's it's the one that I know the most about. But we'll hopefully be able to move a little bit faster because I don't want to keep you too late. So next up is Diwali, the Festival of Lights. So we've got some pictures here of things that happen in Diwali. So Diwali is a Hindu festival, but there are variations that are celebrated in other religions that come from the Indian subcontinent, such as the Jain religion, the Sikh religion. Um, and so because it is kind of varied in terms of the different religions that celebrate it, and because there is such a, even though India isn't a huge country, in terms of geographical space, there are so many people and the geography
People.
varies so very much. So the meaning and the understanding of the details of what is happening with Diwali can actually vary quite widely. But generally speaking, Diwali is a festival that celebrates the victory of light over darkness, and then kind of the the what's the word I'm looking for? The abstract concepts that go along with that: good over evil, knowledge over ignorance, things like that.
Mhm.
It is celebrated somewhere around mid-September to mid-October. So again, the calendar is different than the Gregorian calendar. The Hindu calendar is called lunisolar, so it's very complicated, related to the connection of the moon and the sun. Um, but so it happens, but it does happen in the fall. Our understanding of fall, and it lasts usually 5 or 6 days. Um, it
Was
seems
it just recently? Like, I thought I saw on a calendar or something
yes,
that it was
Yep.
Diwali.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So it's 5 days or sometimes six. And it seems that in ancient India, it was some kind of fusion of a variety of different harvest festivals. So, just like in other places around the world, as transportation, methods grew, and the ability of people to share and trade and things like that grew, different peoples would cross paths with one another. They would share their common understandings of their fall, their harvest festivals, and then they would, kind of steal ideas from each other and develop over time. And eventually, it kind of grew into this conglomeration of a variety of different types of celebration. And so, like I said, there are lots of different details that go into, depending on where the person is from and which religion they adhere to. It's connected to a lot of different deities within Hinduism and other religions, and different divine personalities types. So there are a variety of different stories about the source, the original, where did Diwali originate from, um, even within Hinduism itself. But there are some common shared concepts and threads that you can find between all of the different stories that are shared related to Diwali. They choose different gods to connect these things to, and of course, those gods represent different aspects of life, or different aspects of the world, things like that. But generally speaking, the focus is on righteousness, the importance of knowledge, overcoming darkness, in the metaphorical and literal way. The triumph of good over evil is kind of the bottom line of all of the stories, really. And so it's hard for me. I was going to give some examples of some of the stories, but it's hard to decide, which ones are important and which ones aren't, because depending on where you're from, your story is the most important and the most correct one, right? And everybody else's is something else. So if you're interested, there are lots of different stories out there about different gods and their relationship to Diwali. But that makes Diwali, more diverse, more interesting. The things that are done are more exciting, which I think fits into the concept, because it's about light, it's about knowledge. It's about learning about each other. It's about spending time together, things like that. So obviously, the most important thing is it's a festival of lights. It's about illuminating everything. You illuminate your home, you illuminate your temple, you illuminate your workspace. You use oil lamps, candles, lanterns, things like that. There are fireworks, and there are decorations on the floor, as you can see in some of these pictures, to celebrate with. There is a major focus on food and spending time with family and having feasts together. The festival is typically a time of homecoming, bonding time for families and for communities getting together. There are festivals and fairs that take place in different towns that people can come home and participate in if they don't live in their hometown anymore, things like that. Um, there are there's lots of spending of money during this time, and so a lot of different scholars who study, in different religions would perhaps compare Diwali to Christmas in that way, because the preparations for Diwali are pretty huge. People spend time cleaning their house, but also renovating, decorating, making sure that everything is, just perfect for this celebration. And spending time, with everybody that they love. Of course, the illumination is important, and having all kinds of interesting ways to create light and extra light and beauty inside and outside. As you can see, I really like the picture at the bottom with the crowd of people, and they've all got their candles, but then also they've got the lights, the more modern lights that are shining on the buildings to kind of combine the traditional, oil lanterns, but also we've got different modern ways of illuminating and making things beautiful with light nowadays. Prosperity and wealth and things like that are certainly part of the Diwali concept. And like I said, even small rural villages and things have fairs where there are local artisans that have different things to trade or sell, different entertainments that happen. People wear, their finest attire, and women will decorate their hands with henna in celebration, um, things like that. And so, because Diwali kind of since the beginning has really been about sharing our our traditions and sharing our culture with each other, and kind of stealing back and forth and finding common areas, but also acknowledging differences. It actually, over the course of time, has become about cultural exchange as well, and so it's also an occasion for different people in leadership at the leadership level to 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 kind of reach out across the aisle or across the world. So during Diwali, you'll often see politicians will invite people from outside of their area, or even people that they're kind of trying to develop relationships with. They'll invite them in. Same thing with religious leaders. There is often some kind of important event in the Catholic Church in India during the time of Diwali, because it's culturally, even if you're not Hindu, it's part of kind of the
A big
culture there.
time.
And so to acknowledge, the importance of exchanging of ideas, exchanging of commonalities, and developing relationships, supporting, the idea of diversity and inclusiveness is kind of baked into the whole concept. And so over the course of time, it's become even to the point of, kind of national level things. There certainly isn't the hostility that there used to be on the border between India and Pakistan, but nowadays the soldiers who are stationed on the border from India will take little treats over to their Pakistani uh, I don't know what word I was looking for. The cohort on the other side, and then they'll, the Pakistanis, knowing that this is going to happen, will reciprocate, and so there's some sense of cultural understanding and interest in supporting diversity and learning
Is
more.
that between Indians and Pakistanis?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, wow, that's very big. That's pretty cool.
yeah. So it's an interesting thing, and it's not, like I said, it's not as easy to kind of pin it down. So Karen, maybe that's even why you haven't been able to find as much, because it's depends on the region that you're looking for. I have a friend who is married to a man who is Punjabi, and so he's got his particular understanding of what this is about, and the stories that it comes with, and the gods that are involved, and the mythologies that are involved. But you go 20 miles in any direction, and you're going to have a completely different story and a completely different basis for it. But there are these things that are shared, certainly across the whole thing. So questions, comments here?
Just learning.
Yeah. Was your other neighbor Hindu, Ryan, on the other side?
No, I mean, I have a very, very tiny understanding of Diwali.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to like Diwali festivals, but it's just so different. It's not really there's no one element that is memorable because it is just so universally different that it's
Yeah.
hard to even really form a memory of it because of the fact that it's so everything is so different.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, Yeah, I lived in a neighborhood of townhomes for when my kids were babies and toddlers, where there was a quite large Indian population, and so they had a lot of decorations outside during Diwali, and they had lots and lots of kids that were involved, and so they would always decorate and draw symbols on the sidewalks and sidewalk chalk and things like that. But it seemed like they were having a lot of fun, so.
I mean, yeah, I mean, in elementary school, I grew up with a girl. Every year, she would have the henna on her hands, and it would be a like what? Whole lot of curiosity.
Yeah, yeah.
But
All right. Well, let's hop over to the next one. So the next one that we want to talk about is the Moon Festival or the Mid-Autumn Festival. I know a little bit more about this one because my children were in the Mandarin Immersion program at Reading School of the Arts for a while, and so they actually celebrate this at their school every year. It's pretty cool that they get to participate in that. So the Mid-Autumn Festival takes place in China. There are similar festivals that happen in other Far Eastern Asian countries, but the Mid-Autumn Festival is specifically Chinese. And it takes place on the 15th day of the 8th month in the Chinese calendar, which again is based on a lunisolar calendar. And so it always takes place on a full moon. And the Moon Festival takes place at night. It's usually, in terms of our calendar, it will be sometime between mid-September and early October in our calendar. And it's the belief of the Chinese that the moon is at its fullest and brightest of the year on this particular full moon night. It coincides with the time of the harvest in the middle of autumn. So the Moon Festival historically dates back over 3,000 years. The earliest evidence that we have of the Moon Festival being celebrated is during the Shang Dynasty, which was about 1600 to 1000 BC, so a long, long time ago. And then we actually start to see it gaining more popularity as a full festival, really almost 1,000 years, well, even more than 1,000 years later, into the 600 to 900s AD is kind of when it started to form into what we understand it to be today. So unlike the Diwali, the Mid-Autumn Festival has one basic story. There are some variations in the story and what exactly happens. But the story, the mythology around the Moon Festival is that in ancient times, there were 10 suns. And because there were so many suns and it was so hot, the earth was scorched and life was just you couldn't live. It was unbearable. Things wouldn't grow. You couldn't eat, things like that. And so there is a mythic hero, the archer Ho Yi, and he took his bow and arrow and he shot down 9 out of the 10 suns. And so the people were saved. And because he did this, he earned a reward from the gods. They gave him the elixir of immortality. And now here's where the story diverges a little bit. Ho Yi gave the elixir to his wife, whose name is Chang'e, and she kept it for safekeeping. Now, there's a possibility that the reason why the next thing happens is because Ho Yi became a dictator. His power went to his head. They made him the king, and he was just becoming a terrible leader, and so his wife didn't like that. Or there is another version of the story where one of Ho Yi's apprentices tries to steal the elixir while Ho Yi is away. In other versions, Chang'e is actually herself tempted by the elixir. And so whatever the reason in your particular version of the story, Chang'e, in order to keep it from falling into the wrong hands, or because she wanted it for herself, she drinks the elixir herself. And immediately she becomes immortal and floats up to the moon. And so she resides in a palace on the moon, completely divided from her beloved Ho Yi. So Ho Yi is heartbroken. He can only look up at the moon and see the shadow of his wife. He can't talk to her, he can't interact with her. But in order to try to interact with her in some way, he leaves out her favorite fruits and cakes as an offering. And that tradition is said to be what eventually led to the Mid Autumn Festival. And so, the themes in here you can see about, love and perhaps sacrifice of self in order to protect the one that you love, or some kind of longing, whether it be her longing for immortality or Ho Yi's longing to return his beloved to himself, and he can't do that. There are a variety of ways to interpret it depending on the details of your particular story, but I think those themes are kind of all shared across. So the Moon Festival is a time for people to get together outdoors, reunions. The most important thing, at least in the Reading School of the Arts version, is the eating of the moon cakes. So you can see there's some moon cakes that are piled up. They are just little circular cakes. They are usually made with red bean paste, but always in the center, you have some kind of circular something. And so typically it's like an egg yolk, something like that, because of course everything is supposed to be referring to the moon. And so there's lots of circle stuff. You eat oranges, all those types of, or whatever round food you can think of is something that you can eat while you are spending time together with your family outside, and looking at the beautiful moon, full moon on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. And luckily around here, it's usually fairly warm still for that. And so all the families get together and do that together. And the children sing songs, and it's a lot of fun. So again, we've got themes of unity and diversity, but, kind of the living together in harmony types of things. You also, like in many festivals in China, you get lanterns, the light and prosperity and good fortune to be carried forward. Like I said about the moon cakes, they're usually made out of red sweet beans, and people like to eat those. And then we'll tell the story of Chang'e and view the moon together. So, lots of similar concepts to some of the others that we've already seen: gathering together, celebrating together, celebrating the harvest, family coming back together and reunion. That's probably the most important aspect to the Chinese, is the family reunion aspect. Giving thanks for the harvest and for prosperity, things like that. Let's see, what else do I have on here? Oh, yes. So here's an interesting thing. So in ancient China, there was a belief in rejuvenation in life kind of being associated with the moon and with water. And so the moon and the concepts of fertility were deeply connected. And then they connected this to the concept of menstruation. And so they actually called it the monthly water. And there are stories about the sun and the moon being the celestial couple, and the moon giving birth to the earth, or to some other parts of life as it is. And so there, in ancient Chinese religion, there was a lot of moon worship, and particularly even among women even to the more modern era, giving offerings to the moon in during the full moons, and particularly during this full moon. And so the idea of immortality, through fertility, things like that, connecting to that story about Chang'e and her, elixir of immortality, that kind of thing. So there are some of the themes around the Moon Festival. Questions, comments about that one?
There's a lot to that.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's, you just kind of get together and hang out and sing some songs and eat some mooncakes. The kids usually don't like them, so the parents end up eating most of it. But probably in China they like it better because they're used
Yeah.
to it. The red bean paste is sweet, but it's not as sweet as, sugar.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got two more, but these are actually kind of connected in some ways. So I'll call this one and a half more. So I don't know how to say this because I can't say any Gaelic words, but Samhain, something like that. And it's a Gaelic festival. It takes place on November 1st. So finally, we've got one that is with our Gregorian calendar. We don't have to worry so much about it jumping all over the place. It is traditionally marks the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. It is a festival for communing with the ancestors, and that part of the festival helps us to understand it's predating even the Celtic era. Some of the stone circles that you find in northern Britain are actually aligned for the purpose of picking up the setting sun on October 31st of the year.
Mm.
And so, interestingly, the monoliths that are set up, that we really don't exactly know where they came from or who put these things there, but for some reason, this particular time of year was important, at least for some of them, because they set up these important ritual sites in alignment with this particular day. So the celebration begins in the evening on October 31st. And the reason for that is because the Celtic day, the understanding of a day is not, we understand a day to be from midnight to midnight. The Celts understood it to begin and end at sunset, similar to ancient Judaism. And the reason why this is the day that this happens is because we are actually about halfway between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice at this point. And so, interestingly, this doesn't take place on the equinox itself, nor does it take place on the winter solstice. It takes place halfway between those two things. So I think that's really interesting. And
Yeah.
there are four of these seasonal festivities. One happens in, of course, the center of each of the seasons of the year, and celebrated throughout Ireland, Scotland, Isle of Man. Those parts of I never remember how, there's specific ways that you're supposed to refer to these things. You've got Britain, you've got England, you've got what's the other one? Anyway, I don't want to say the wrong thing. So those are so there's a lot of literature, even early literature, because of the invasion of the Romans into these areas. Well, not quite this high, but in at least nearby. So there's lots of literature that talks about early celebrations of Samhain, and there again lots of gathering of people together, feasts. There's evidence that there were the ancient burial mounds, so the not the place where they buried their recent dead, but their ancestors. The burial mounds would actually be opened. The understanding being that this is a night when portals to the other world open up, and so we open up the graves, and our ancestors can commune with us. bonfires, sacrifices are mentioned in the literature as well. During this time of year in agriculture in Ireland and Scotland is when it's time to bring the cattle from the summer pastures that are higher up elevation wise down into the lower pastures, so that they can survive, the harsh winters. And that's also when the cattle are, counted, checked out, and then they decide which ones are are ready for slaughter. And so there is a time of, celebration related to that, and the use of the cattle for food and for other things. So you have your bonfires. The bonfires, the significance of the bonfires is related to protection. The fire will, keep any, evil spirits away, cleansing, the cleansing power of fire, that kind of thing. Like I said, the boundary between our world and the other world is thinner, and so contact with the spirits is more readily available. And so we try at this time to, connect potentially with our lost loved ones. The bonfires are both to protect us from the spirits that might want to harm us, and to cleanse, to burn up the harmful influences of not just the spirits, but of our lives in general. To the ashes and the smoke of fire was understood to have cleansing power, and ashes were often used to clean, to heal, because they didn't have modern medicine to help them out with those types of things. Sometimes people understood that the souls of the dead could revisit on this particular night because of the thinning of that division between this world and the other world. And so, in some places, the dinner table had an extra plate set to welcome the dead, the souls returning home, to to commune with the people. And so, to prevent them from being angry and make them feel welcome, you have to sacrifice in some way to them by giving them a plate of food or something like that. Another interesting thing that's going to help us to transition from this one to our next one is called mumming and guising. Mumming and guising. It was first recorded in the 16th century in Scotland, and then spread into other parts of, again, whatever that area is called politically and geographically. And what people would do is that they would, particularly young men, would go from house to house, and they would be in disguise, guising, and they would recite songs or verses, poetry, and they would tell people that they needed to give them food. And the costumes potentially are because the people were actually impersonating the spirits of the dead. And so they were coming to represent the dead, and therefore they would retrieve the offerings, that food that was left out for the dead members of the family, would be actually received by these people that were in the disguise. And it kind of had a double helpfulness too, because if you are impersonating a spirit, if you're guising yourself, then it protects you from an evil spirit attacking you, because it thinks that you too are a spirit that is traveling, collecting your sacrifices. And
so my Googling says it's pronounced Samhain.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
Gaelic, it doesn't look anything like that.
Yeah, Gaelic. I've given up trying to understand how to pronounce
that is proper Gaelic.
Yeah. So some of these things sound familiar because it trickles into what we now call Halloween, or All Hallows Eve. Because as we see Christianity developing in this area of the world, we have these Celtic rituals that are well established, but then we have Christianity coming in and trying to either wipe things out or modify things that are already happening for the purpose of Christianizing them. And we, I think, as especially as Protestant Christians, are very uncomfortable with the idea of Christianity being sullied in some way by the rituals of pagans that came before us. But that's kind of the reality of what we've got going on here. And it makes sense, to if you want to convert people, if you want to control people using your religion, then you can't take everything from them. You have
No.
to rephrase it. You have to reframe it for them. So by the end of the 12th century, we see the celebration of All Saints Day, November 1st, becoming a holy day of obligation, requiring people to attend church services and ring church bells to help out souls that are stuck in purgatory. People would dress up in black and walk through the streets ringing bells, calling on good Christians to remember the poor and remember the souls of those who have died and are stuck in purgatory, and obviously fix that by giving some of your money to the church. There was a tradition called All Hallow Tide, and this is the period of time when people would bake soul cakes and give them out. This happened as far back as the 17th or the 15th century in England and Austria, Bavaria. And the deal was that usually poor children would go door to door and they would collect these soul cakes, and that would be kind of an exchange for a prayer said for the dead relatives of the people who lived in the house. I guess, there is a belief even still today that, the poor are more holy than the rest of us. And so the children, could take advantage of that by getting themselves some food in exchange for the prayers that they were willing to give to the souls of the people who the household owners, wanted them to pray for. Different Halloween symbols that we are familiar with developed, over the course of time. For example, the jack-o'-lantern was originally carried by the geysers, not geysers like shooting water, but the people who disguised themselves to frighten evil spirits away. If they had the scary face carved into their pumpkin with a light inside, then that would help to keep the evil spirits away. And they would disguise themselves in costume to imitate the spirits to protect themselves from the real spirits as they went around gathering up their soul cakes and otherwise, taking part in some of these pagan rituals that we are now trying to turn into Christian rituals. But again, we see some of the familiar some of the familiar ideas here. This one is a little more related, to explicitly to death and to ancestor worship or ancestor remembrance, things like that. But I think it certainly connects to the fall of the year, the ending of things, and then therefore the importance of unity and being together. And when we know that this is what's coming for us, then perhaps it helps us to remember the importance of spending that time with the people that we love and being grateful and all those types of things that can bring things together. So what questions, comments do we have on this?
No, none for me.
I just have a question, just that's something that comes to mind. And I know my kids experienced this a little bit when they were young. I don't remember going through it when I was a kid, but occasionally I hear some criticism, um, judgment about celebrating Halloween with your children because it's a pagan holiday,
Yep.
and um, I think I understand kind of where that comes from, but how do we rationalize it? I mean, most people, I guess, what's the argument
I
for Halloween?
mean, in my opinion,
Not
all,
an argument, but a
yeah.
statement, I guess.
Well, in my opinion, all Christian holidays have pagan sources. And, I think as we go through this year, we'll learn more and more about that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Christmas is Saturnalia. Even Easter
Mhm.
has its sources in pagan holidays and stealing from others, and that's just what we do as humans. We see something that somebody else is doing, and we want to find meaning. That was kind of the main focus of our conversation last month. When we can't control that the world changes, we can't control that we change, but we can understand it and give it meaning. And that's kind of I think the human, the most basic human impulse is to look for meaning. And so we all do the same stuff. We are just looking, we just understand it in different ways. We give it slightly different meaning, but we have a very universal and experience of life in terms of the changes that happen and aging and the changing of seasons and things like that. And so you're going to see those types of connections, and some people are threatened by that. Especially, like I said, Protestants, have a huge problem with this because we have to get back to the original, right? We have to get back to the most pure version of this. But there is no pure version of this. I think that, the one of the main reasons that we have the incarnation and not just a God that's kind of out there divided from all of us is that God understands that people are contextual. People live in a particular place and time. And so God is present in those places. So is it okay for us to gather around a bonfire and roast marshmallows and go trick or treating and wear our costumes and um, you know uh, do all of these things, whether we understand it from a secular position or we understand it from a slightly superstitious, tomorrow is All Saints Day, and so we're
So
trying to
exactly.
connect to the spirits. I I don't think it's that important because everybody's going to put slightly different interpretation, a slightly different spin on why we're doing things.
Mhm.
But to think about what does it mean, what is important to us. We've talked in several of our other classes about those theological boulders, the most important things for us to hold on to about God and about who we are. And if we're asking the right questions, what does Halloween help us to understand about God's love? If you ask that question and you can
Well,
find
back to the basics, it's the the community going out to their neighbors, giving out cakes in and asking for prayers for their people that they're
right,
those who
right,
have passed on. So what a that's a beautiful thing.
yeah, yeah. And
Um,
so does it matter that it originates with, people who aren't Christians? I don't think so. I think
no.
it's, nobody is sending their children out to sacrifice, to make blood sacrifices to, some Celtic goddess or something like there, so
Yeah.
I understand, that people are trying to be purists, but I just don't think that there's anything such thing as purity. I think we have to understand that, and it's a lot easier when we
I think, yeah, that that puts that gives me a lot more perspective. It's the bigger picture. Look at the bigger picture
yeah,
instead
yeah.
of just focusing on.
What are we doing? I mean, in our society today, the only time of year that my children talk to our neighbors is on Halloween. They go up, they get their candy, they say trick or treat, they say thank you, and they walk away. Because we just don't live in a world where, we know our neighbors well anymore. And so if we can have one night when everybody says, let's be a little inconvenienced for the sake of the children of our community and not just our own, then I'm fine with that. I have no problem.
Yeah, I like the reminder. I know that All Saints Day is always celebrated right around Thanksgiving, and so I needed that reminder of what that looked like. That was good.
Yeah. So
Indeed.
Halloween is
Halloween,
actually the evening of
man,
Hallows
evening,
Day.
like evening,
Yep.
evening.
Yep. Evening of the hallowed
All
evening.
Hallows Day.
Yes, the hallowed evening, because tomorrow is All Saints Day.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you, Katie. That
Love
was
it.
good.
So, just to kind of wrap it up and summarize, we've got all these different themes that we've seen throughout all of this of family unity, fruitfulness, plenty and gratitude, the light over darkness and good over evil, protection and sacrifice, and love of neighbor, um, death, ancestors, and longing, the reality that things are changing and that the winter is coming and that there's nothing we can do about that death is coming for us all, and all those kinds of melancholy thoughts that we have to deal with as humans. But then to wrap that in with the family and the unity and the gratitude, I think is a healthy balance of all of those things together. And so I think fall harvest festivals are a good opportunity for us to kind of experience the gamut and just recognize what it means to be human, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. It's a great
Yeah, you could do a
perspective
whole
on it.
study. You could do a whole study just on these words.
Yes, certainly. All right. Well, any final thoughts that anyone wants to share tonight?
Start this drive after the.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. That was really fun.
Good.
I enjoyed
Yes.
Thanks
learning
for
a little
all
bit
the
more about these
research and
things and thinking about them. So next time we will talk about knowledge and knowledge and learning festivals. So it'll be not a theme related to the season of the year, but a theme just related to kind of one of the common topics that I've seen in some of the festivals. But we'll do the same thing,
Interesting.
just kind of go through some of the different ones that are connected and find common threads that we can maybe learn something from.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's
Cool.
great.
All right.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you.
All right, nice meeting you all, and see
Yes.
you next
Take
time.
care.
thanks
Oh,
for coming.
and just
Bye, everybody.
everybody, just real quick, make a note. We will not be on the 4th
Oh,
Thursday next month because
November.
it is Thanksgiving. So we'll be on the
Yes.
3rd.
Okay.
Third
Okay.
Third Thursday of the month.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Everybody take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.